Hi everybody, welcome to a very special video today. I have a special guest. This is my dad, Christopher Fay.
Hello.
And we have spent the last 3.5 years playing a game called The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I don't think you need me to tell you, obviously Breath of the Wild is a really great game. We have it up here in the background. It's my favorite video game ever made. You've heard me say that countless times. Yeah, obviously, it's a good game. And I just wanted to have Chris sort of give your introduction.
Yes, well, as Dana mentioned, we've been playing the game for 3.5 years. It's been quite an adventurous journey as we go through all the various landscapes and adventures that Link has as he goes on his hero's quest.
Absolutely. My first question is just right off the bat, like, what's your prior history with, like, Zelda games?
Well, Dana, as you know, I've played or watched you play most of these Zelda games from the very beginning. That's almost 20 years now of Zelda game watching or observing, and I've noticed they went through quite an evolution over that time from being more simple arcade style games to games that had much more involved storylines, and even now these more open world games such as Breath of the Wild and a few of its predecessors, which had that open and questing quality that seems to have come so much to fruition in this particular version, Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, and along with that, what other games have you had a history playing or watching as well?
Well, we played Skyward Sword. We did the one with the boat.
Oh, the Wind Waker?
The Wind Waker, and we did the Twilight Princess, which is a very good game.
Twilight Princess, definitely.
And what was that? We had another game that was one of the earliest classics that had this open world concept, whose name I forget at the moment.
Is it a Zelda game?
It was a Zelda game. Yeah.
Ocarina of Time?
Ocarina of Time, of course.
Oh yeah.
How can we forget Ocarina
Classic
of Time?
game.
Yes. Which may have been the first canonical storyline game in the series.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And what do you think makes this Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, stand out the most?
Well, as I mentioned in my opening comment, Breath of the Wild is the culmination of the hero's quest paradigm that Joseph Campbell talked about so extensively in his series on mythology. Clearly, Link has always been a questing character in his various incarnations, while Zelda has been the linchpin that ties the whole series together. Zelda is sort of the immortal personality that allows the hero of time to have different manifestations in different periods of the game. In The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, it's clear that Link in this case is the culmination of a hero after the downfall of civilization. So as such, you could also say that Link and Breath of the Wild are sort of a post-Gotodamarung incarnation of the series. If we could tie it back to things such as the Norse myths and the Wagnerian opera ring cycle, where Link and Zelda in this case would be the characters that arise from the Twilight of the Gods, from the Gotodamarung, or even in the biblical culture, the idea of arising after the final Armageddon. So it's sort of a game that takes place after the end of civilization and a civilization rising anew. And incorporating certain aspects of that old civilization in the new. We don't know how that will turn out because the end of the game really is just the destruction of Calamity Ganon and Zelda asking Link what will come next. So that's very open-ended. But we know that at least the spirits of the past times are there to help them out in the forms of the 4 heroes of the other 4 races involved.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because obviously I've played countless hours of Breath of the Wild, and more recently I've been reading some of those Conan the Cimmerian graphic novels, Conan the Barbarian, and some of the parallels are almost uncanny. Just sort of that, sort of noble savage, wanderer, the warrior that sort of goes to different lands and helps people. Like, Link will go to like the desert, then he'll go to the mountains to help the Rito, as we see here in the background. Other places might include like the Zora's Domain or Death Mountain. So there's just sort of that, that journey, like every journey is sort of self-contained, but also paints a bigger picture ultimately as you play towards the end of the game.
Very true. The one thing I missed in this was the Ocarina. I do think that was an artifact that was interesting in that earlier game that I haven't seen as much in previous games. Perhaps it will appear in a sequel to this Breath of the Wild.
I sure hope so. I love the Ocarina as an instrument, and just really cool how you could play music on it and actually play it into the gameplay of that particular game. Yeah, definitely. So, now we're getting into more sort of nitty-gritty. Now we've sort of gone through the philosophical elements of this game, what makes this game stand out. I wanted to just get into sort of the more nitty-gritty specific to this game sort of stuff. So, first off, I wanted to ask, who is your favorite character?
Well, I'd have to say my favorite character in the game is Link, because he is the main protagonist that really carries the action along. Certainly, Zelda is important for being the link, the tie-in throughout the game and to previous games and previous histories. But I suppose my favorite secondary character would be our Goron friend. Daruk.
Yeah, Mr. Daruk.
Who certainly is one of the most helpful of the 4 heroes, and especially providing Daruk's protection to Link at the most critical moments of the game.
Oh yeah, especially when you're fighting some of those Lynels, those big centaur-like monsters.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Daruk was really, really cool. I like all the champions. I'd say Daruk's probably my favorite, followed by Urbosa. Again, but they're all good. So obviously Breath of the Wild has a very diverse world and ecosystem that feels very real, very lived in, Like, that's one of the things I think makes the game so great is just how immersive the world of the game is, and just how, like, how any one specific area is, like, so big and vast and yet also super dense, There's always something more to see and do in that world. So of all the, there's a lot of different areas in this game. What do you think was your favorite location in Hyrule in this game?
My favorite location in Hyrule, including, for example, the deserts and
all of it. Yeah, the whole map.
Yeah. I think overall, while it was all wonderfully portrayed and detailed, I did like the episodes in the desert tremendously. Very imaginative concepts such as the sand seal.
Oh, that was so much fun.
And the sand shield riding, that was great. As were the battles with the sandworms, which reminded me a great deal of Frank Herbert's Dune series. And I wonder if the developers of Breath of the Wild might not have gotten some ideas from Dune.
Yeah, absolutely. What I really liked about the desert area was, of course, I really enjoy sort of ancient Egyptian-inspired places, which clearly the Gerudo Desert was at least partially inspired by. It also even had some sort of ancient Romanesque structures to sort of try to, again, take inspiration from, like, the real world. or Greek structures and stuff like that. And I thought that was really cool. Alright, now we get to talk about the enemies, or as my nephew likes to call them, monsters! But what was your favorite enemy or scariest monster in your opinion?
Well, I think the scariest ones probably were the more capable Lionels, because of course there were different classifications of Lionels. Some more dangerous than others, and I believe it was the sort of zebra-colored Lionels
Yes!
that were particularly difficult. They certainly were hard to defeat, and until Link was able to acquire more powers and a better suite of tools, better weapons, swords and shields, it was very hard to defeat the Lionels and not end up being killed. That said, I also really enjoyed the Wiz Robes because they were very unpredictable, and also the Yiga, especially the Chief Yigas, because of their implacable desire to battle.
Yes.
So that was interesting.
They went along with what they wanted to do.
Certainly, they provided a link back to the samurai culture, from which the Legend of Zelda series, I think, is at least partially derived.
Definitely, yeah. There's what I liked so much about this particular game was how it, most Zelda games, were sort of very loosely sort of inspired by, medieval, Europe sort of in a way, you go back to Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess, the Hyrules in that game, it looks very much like, medieval sort of, France or Germany or even Great Britain. But this one, it's much more diverse and broad in terms of the cultures that it's inspired by. And this is, I think, the first Zelda game to really have a much more Japanese flavor in at least parts of the map, which I greatly appreciated. Going on to the next question, what was your favorite melee weapon? Favorite sword? Melee weapon includes swords, axes, clubs, spears, claymores.
Well, I think the Master Sword and the Soldier's Shield probably were my favorite combination of weapons.
Can't beat the classics.
You can't go wrong with those. I also liked some of the specialty weapons during certain battles, like we had was it the Frost Sword?
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
we had that.
The Frost Blade.
The Frost Blade was very interesting.
Yeah, those were really cool.
And I also liked a number of the different bows and arrows, especially the different combinations of the soldier's bow and even the Lionel bow with the explosive arrows and the fire arrows, able to do a great deal of damage to an enemy.
Oh yeah, those are lots of fun to use. Yeah, what I really like about this is how many different weapon combinations, unique tricks you can come up with. In past Zelda games, you basically just have the Master Sword and that would be it. But in this game, there's just so many more weapons you can choose. And well, it's always nice to sort of, once you get the Master Sword to default to that, there's also, obviously, the weapons are more finite because they actually do break in this game. But on the other hand, there's so many weapons scattered throughout the world of Hyrule that you're never really, starving for weapons.
Well, that's true, but then also the suite of weapons allows you to pick the particular weapon against an enemy.
Exactly.
So some enemies respond more to certain weapons than others, which is interesting, and that provides some strategic thinking.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think the combat in this Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, is one of the best combat systems of really any game period. What do you think was the most... Now we're getting... And this is one that I myself don't even know if I have an answer for this one yet, but what do you think is the most fun mechanic, fun Sheikah rune? So let's start with mechanics. So this game provides so many more mechanics, to explore the vast land of Hyrule. Like, you have climbing, you have paragliding, you have shield surfing. Of like just some of those mechanics, which of like those do you think is the most fun?
Well, that's interesting. I say my observation is that the gliding and the climbing probably were used the most. They were very important to drive the drama of the game forward.
Yeah, the exploration.
And keep the play going.
Yeah.
If you weren't able to glide or climb, it would have been very difficult to access some of the quests. Trying to choose between those two is hard to do. I'd say that there were other, as you say, mechanics. Would you include things like the stasis or magnesis in that?
Yeah, well that was like leading into like rune abilities.
Rune abilities, okay.
But yeah, like do you have like a favorite rune ability between like magnesis, which allows you to like pick up metal objects, stasis, which allows you to freeze certain objects and eventually certain enemies in time for a couple seconds, cryonis, which allows you to like create blocks.
I think the cryonis may have been the most interesting because it can often be used in conjunction with the gliding.
That's a good point. And you could climb the ice blocks too.
I think it would be hard to do the game without both the gliding and climbing mechanics available to you.
I agree.
And I think you probably could do the game without the stasis and magnesis, although I'd have to think about that based on some of the temples, some of the shrines that we entered. So it's curious. It may be, having a favorite is fine, but I think it may be that all of them were required at some point to complete the game.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I feel like gliding and climbing are sort of like, you can't really have one without the other. They're sort of the two sides of the same coin. And they're both lots of fun, obviously. But, you know, you can't really have one without the other. What was your favorite meal to cook in this game?
Well, I think the favorite meal was something involving raw meat and some of the various mushrooms. The rushrooms were good, and we had the stamina.
The stamina shrooms, right.
So cooking a meat dish with those two shroom varieties, I think, was always a winner.
Yeah, for sure. That was a very hearty meal. I especially liked it when you could like mix some of the raw meat with like the hearty radishes or hearty mushrooms that you would find, and hearty truffles. Like that would provide a real good meal, especially going into like a big Lino fight. Like that would be very useful.
Yes. Of course, it was also interesting that not every meal was successful. Some of them used ingredients that individually were good, but did not turn into a good meal.
Yeah. Some of them you really had to like use your mind to think, will this work with that? You know, using a lot of logic. Alrighty. Moving on down the line, what do you think was your favorite side quest?
I think the favorite side quest, again, if I go back to the desert country, I think the favorite side quest was finding the crown for the princess of the Gerudos.
Yes.
And that took a long time to complete, too.
The Thunder Helm, yeah. That one was all really fun. Because we actually more or less did the completion run of the game. We did all the shrines and all the shrine quests before going to the final boss.
Yes.
The one side quest we did, finding that electric darner took forever, and then we realized we could just go to a shop somewhere and buy it from Beetle at one of the stables.
And it may have been that we had to go to buy it. It may not have been possible.
It may indeed.
Otherwise.
So we were just running around aimlessly for like multiple play sessions trying to find the dang electric darter.
Yep.
Already. What do you think was like the best horse in this game, or the best mount?
The best mount. Well, I think Epona probably was the best horse. I think I might say that the most interesting mount was the Spirit of the Mountains.
Lord of the Mountains.
Lord of the Mountains.
That was such a cool addition.
So that was a nice treat to be able to have the Lord of the Mountains as at least a temporary mount. I think as a good course, for most every other occasion, though, the opponent certainly was excellent.
Totally. Again, can't beat the classics. What was your favorite story moment?
The favorite story.
Because the game does have quite a grand narrative.
It does. I did like the cutscene with our flying friend.
With Ali?
With Ali. And the story of how he tried to defeat Ganon and was defeated by Ganon instead. That was a very poignant tale, and I think it was. I think it spoke to the concept of hubris and how dangerous it can be to be overconfident with one's enemies.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because Rivali really exemplifies sort of a cocky personality, you know. He thinks he can do no wrong, he's the best at everything, you know, then, you know, he goes in thinking he's gonna, like, take it out no problem, but he fails.
Yeah, but that story also provided some deep lessons for Link in his hero's quest journey. So that was, it was almost a Jason and the Argonauts kind of tale between Hercules and Jason, where Hercules went through a similar situation on the island of the giants, and through his hubris and excessive confidence ended up having his friend destroyed, but Hercules was then able to pass that self-knowledge of humility before battle to Jason. In a similar case, Rivali served that same function for Link in that story.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Another thing I've loved about this game from the very beginning was even some of the sort of parallels to, like, Greek mythology. Like, you see a lot of structures that sort of have a Greek or Roman-inspired influence to them, but then, you know, just even like the whole narrative has sort of a Greek sort of Odyssey or feel to it as well. So it's really neat that, you know, even though it's a fantasy game that takes place in a fictitious universe, it takes a lot of, like, inspiration from, like, real legends, as it were, to craft its own Legend of Zelda.
Certainly the game could be studied by a mythologist such as Joseph Campbell, and probably could be the source of a number of papers, articles on mythology and social importance of games such as Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and how they relate to the larger human set of legends and stories.
Without question. Sort of going along with that previous question, what was the best memory? Like, you know, throughout the game, you know, because the game is so open, you know, the story is not in a linear manner, so it's split up into several different memories that Link has to track down to find. And of course, we did eventually find all of them, and they all ended up sort of splicing together tidbits of, you know, Hyrule as it once was, and ultimately sort of giving you the incentive to finally stop Ganon and, you know, put an end to all this calamity. Which of those memories do you think was the best, most poignant? Would you say the same? That answer that you already gave me, or do you have a different?
Perhaps I was going to say that I think the memory of Link with Zelda when Zelda fails to stop Calamity Ganon might be one of the more poignant ones, when Link is then carried off to the Temple of Time for eventual renewal.
Yeah.
That was certainly an interesting story.
Yeah, what I really like about that is that we really see how selfless both Link and Zelda actually are as characters, because Link literally was willing to risk his life to protect Zelda even to the point of death, and arguably to that point. And then Zelda, even if when she thought she had already lost Link, you know, decided to stand in front of him to block a final blow from one of the Guardians, which had its laser squarely pointed at Link's forehead, and thinking she'll probably die anyway, she still does it, but that's of course when she realizes she has the golden power of the gods that she then uses to finally win the battle against the Guardians. They already lost the war at that point, but at least there was that spark of hope.
Yes.
And you know, especially like playing this game during like the coronavirus situation, I think made it even more impactful, given how how rough our real world can seem at times.
It provided an outlet for future hope, and gave us a chance to believe that a better world was possible after this.
Yeah. And only a few more questions. We're getting to the end. I really appreciate your sticking around with this.
Oh, yes.
Why do you think The Legend of Zelda remains relevant after 35 years? Because remember, the first Zelda game came out on the Nintendo Entertainment System in the mid to 1980s. Why do you think The Legend of Zelda saga has still remained relevant and ongoing and just continues to like build and like get bigger and bigger?
I think the very first Zelda games were more arcade style, and I don't want to say that they could have been any particular hero or heroine in them, but they were similar to other sort of battling games that were going on at that time. I think that as they developed the story and as the technology became better, that it could be portrayed in more of a story format. They were able to incorporate more aspects of that universal human desire for stories that answer questions and provide pathways to ethical and moral behavior. So I think at its core, the Zelda tales are also tales of what people can do to be moral and behave ethically throughout their life. That's something that sets it apart from so many other video games nowadays, which are strictly games to shoot or destroy, or that have no ultimate meaning other than winning the game. There is a moral universe that the Legend of Zelda series inhabits that is almost unique among video games today. And I believe that's why it maintains its popularity.
Totally, and I think it's like very accessible, but in a good way. Like, you know, it can appeal to people of all ages, because like the actual the story itself, you know, on the surface level is relatively straightforward, but you know, all the Zelda games and stories have a lot more sort of deeper meaning, like a lot more to think about in terms of, you know, what does this actually mean, that sort of thing, and like relating it to like, you know, philosophical sort of, you know, mythic legends from times long ago. And that is actually sort of segueing into the next question. So what do you think of just the game's sort of mythic quality as a whole? Because it unquestionably has such. I feel like the game has the visual style that it has, in a way, sort of evoke that mythic quality. It's almost like a story being told in that visual style.
Yeah, so talk about the visual style. Again, it has this grand appearance, very similar to what we might call the Romantic school in 19th century European painting, or Hudson River / Illuminist school of painting in North America. One's reminded, for example, of Bierstadt's painting of the American West in the 1870s, 1880s. Or Thomas Moran's paintings at the same time. So we have this grandeur, this appearance of an untamed landscape that the hero has to pass through. I think that also is somewhat unique in the gaming world today.
Definitely. And I think the game is incredibly looks incredible, honestly. Like one of the most like visually appealing games I've ever seen, without question. And I think it really aids to sort of giving the game just sort of that mythic quality that I think helps it stand the test of time, along with, of course, the outstanding, action gameplay.
Yes.
And everything else that goes with that.
To which I have to depend on you for the gameplay, since I'm not that good a gamer personally. You'd probably still be on our first quest if I was playing the game.
Yeah, it's always a work in progress. Let's look at so obviously, there's going to be another Zelda game coming out sometime next year. And what do you see as like the future of the Zelda series in your mind? Like, what do you find interesting about the possibilities for like where it can go from here?
Well, of course, I think there are a few possibilities. One, I don't know that the Zelda timeline has been definitively nailed down yet. I know there are controversies about that. I think that if the developers of Legend of Zelda would come up with a set of canonical games, which I think many people believe they already have, but would then look at the interstices between those games and say, here is a place to fill in more of the story. They may come up with some maybe prequels to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but ones that would be sequels to some of the earlier games that would seem to have taken place in an earlier time span. I'm not sure we completely have the story of the downfall of Hyrule yet, of the first Hyrule and how it fell. I think it's touched on in many of the games. I don't know if we have the complete story of that yet. Even if we have the prequel to this, I think there's more to say. And then I think there's probably a sequel to Breath of the Wild. I don't know what form that will take, because that would be the development of a new world, and possibly with a completely different sort of menace villain available other than Ganon. And who would that be? We don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Definitely, and I feel like, with Breath of the Wild, it's really opened up the floodgates to what's possible in the Zelda game, because like when this game came out, like I was expecting, it to be a much more predictable Zelda game than it ended up being, and it like completely, demolished my expectations, pound for pound. Like it was like, it did so many things that I never thought I'd see in a video game, let alone a Zelda game. Like it was like this, it was like one of my favorite YouTubers, Arlo, shout out, did a review of this game a few years ago, and he said that the biggest thing that Breath of the Wild did was it played a game, it gave him a game that he had previously only dreamed of. And that's exactly what like Breath of the Wild is. And now like I think the fact that a game like Breath of the Wild, the fact that a game like Breath of the Wild exists at all should be celebrated by the gaming community and by anybody, who considers themselves into art. Like, I think this is the highest form of art in video games. Like, I feel like it simultaneously reaffirms why video games are so much fun, yet at the same time redefining what an open world video game can be, Making it, it's about the open world, It's not like about ticking off a whole bunch of check boxes, although, there are a lot of quests you can do. It's about, exploring the world and taking in the views and, enjoying how dynamic the world is. And, that's what I think makes it such an immersive experience. Not to have hogged the discussion there, what final thoughts do you have?
My only final thoughts are that it's been a great game and quite a journey. If Nintendo was able to produce a game of similar depth and complexity then Dana and I probably had another 3.5 years of gaming ahead of us. And in the meantime, what I'd like to say is that we had our tea, and now it's time for bed.
Well, it is, but it's actually only like 3:45 in the afternoon. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a night owl by trade. I mean, even though I would be if my job allowed it. Alright, well, thank you so much for watching this video, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening.
I'd say this is the best video game of all time, in my humble opinion. We had a non-gamer play it with us today, and for the last 3.5 years, and we got to hear some really clever insights from somebody who's very well versed in, you know, lore and myth and legend.
Well, thank you for your kind
Legend
words.
of Zelda.
Excellent.
All right.
Look forward to the next interview.
Hi, thank you so much for watching this latest video of mine. This was a very fun and special collaboration I was able to do with my dad. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other videos. While we're here today, I wanted to give a shout out to one of my favorite YouTube channels, KwingLet'sPlays. If you like wholesome, family-friendly Let's Plays of video games, you will love Kwing's Let's Plays. I've been following Nightwing01 for more than 15 years now, and I have always loved his content. Unfortunately, the YouTube algorithms have not been very kind to Kwing's Let's Plays of late, and they really do need as much support as possible to be able to keep doing what they're doing and be able to keep, you know, making my day and many other people's days a little bit brighter. So please visit Kwing's Let's Plays. Out of respect for their channel, I will not be providing a link in this video, but I do absolutely encourage you to check out their stuff because it is really good. With that all out of the way, hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care.